All right, so we're continuing on with our splayed dovetail stool. We've cut our tailboards, and now we're ready to transfer them onto our pin boards. Whenever we're doing our dovetails, we cut it tails first. That's my preferred method. I feel it gives us the largest margin of error. It's a lot easier. Once you have those cut, then you need to transfer those on. This becomes a template for our pin board. And in this project with the splayed dovetails, this is really sort of where the rubber meets the road. This is the tricky part. So I want to walk you through that, just the transferring method. It's kind of awkward. That's really the only difference here between doing a square dovetail and these splays, is that the angle just adds an extra challenge, not so much in making the cuts, but just in sort of handling the pieces. So you can see that once I have it on there, by having that 7-degree angle cut on opposing ends of our pin board, it gives us that splay. But you can see it's kind of awkward to kind of hold it at the right angle. So to make my life easier and to get more accurate results, what I've done here is I've made something to brace the piece as I transfer it. So you'll recognize this. This is the sacrificial pieces we used when we were figuring out our dovetail layout. You can see a link in the description below to watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. But we sort of customized our dovetail layout to match this project. So on those pieces, on the end, I cut my 7-degree angle on my sliding compound miter. So I cut it on this one and this one, joined them up opposing, and I have my splay here. I then took a support piece and cut that same 7-degree angle. So basically you can see once you have that angle set, you're going to leave your saw like that until the project's done. It's going to come up a couple times. And then in between, I added a brace piece. And what that's going to let me do is let me take this piece that has my splay set on it and set it in my vise. I'm going to push it down, make sure it sits nice and flat. And what that does is it allows me to take my pin board with my 7-degree splay and place it at that angle. So I have my marking gauge scribe already on there. I did that earlier when I did my dovetail layout. I'm going to make sure it's just nice and flush with the top. And then you can't see this, but I've kind of got my knee under it to hold it in place while I put a spring clamp on there. I'll make sure it's still flush and get a spring clamp on both sides. And now I'm hands-free. So I have this clamped on there with spring clamps, and it's holding it at my 7-degree angle, and now I can then take my tailboard, and I've labeled each side A and B so I don't get them mixed up. Remember, there could be slight differences because my dovetails are cut by hand. It's not a big deal as long as I keep them lined up. So this is corner A, and now this one will be corner B. And so I have them aligned. If I wanted to, I could put a clamp here as well. We want to line them up on our ends, but we also want to make sure that our mahogany stripe carries through. I'd hate to have them, say, be offset or something. That would just look silly. We've put a lot of care into making sure that they line up perfectly. So once I have that set, I want to look at my inside shoulder. I want to see that this meets up with the inside shoulder there. I don't want any gaps. Any gaps that are present at this point in the project will carry through. If you cut your dovetail and you can see a gap on the inside edge, no matter how hard you try, that gap is going to stay. You're wedging it into that position. So I want to make sure that my inside shoulder lines up, and remember my board is going to stick past a little bit past the face of our pin board. The idea is that we always have them stick past, and afterwards we trim them flush. I am using Swiss-made chip carving knife to transfer my dovetails. You'll see a lot of items out there called dovetail marking knives. They're very nice quality knives, and they work nicely. The concept is that it's flat on one side and beveled on the other so that you get a truer line. But what I don't like about them is they're relatively thick like a chisel, and they don't fit in between my thin dovetails. I like to make sure that when I cut my dovetails that my thickness on my pin right here is under 3/16 of an inch. The idea being that even when I trim them down, no matter what, it's less than 1/4 inch. It shows that it wasn't cut with a router, this was cut by hand. If you happen to like your dovetails a little more open at the end, then that marking knife might be fine for you. But instead, I like to use my chip carving knife. I like the Swiss-made ones, and they're not that expensive. And when you progress on to doing some carving, you'll need it for that anyway. So you get 2 out of 1. So I'm going to line that up. I'm going to make sure my mahogany stripe lines up. I'm going to make sure that my inside shoulder is good. You know, you might need to take a flashlight or something to make sure you're good. So I have that. Again, I could clamp that. Or you can see it's pretty comfortable. I've got my hands free and I'm just bracing this with one hand. I'm going to use the knife. I'm going to drag it lightly. There's no need to be forceful. I'd rather go lightly 1 or 2 times and not have it move. If I push hard, I could push the tailboard out of alignment. I'm going to scribe each side. Now I don't have to get the entire length. We'll extend the line after. So as you get to that bottom of your tail, if the knife seems like it's kind of stuck, or maybe the width of your knife is almost exactly the width, don't go any further, because what'll happen is it'll sort of pull it out of alignment and you won't have an accurate scribe. Just if you got 50% of the length of your tail transferred, that would be enough to get an accurate line. I'm going ahead and doing that. I, out of habit, go all left, then all right. Twice lightly rather than once hard. That way I don't push it out of alignment. Okay, so that's all of them. So now let's see, let's look at what we've transferred. So you can see here, I haven't gone the full length on all of these. That's fine, because what I can do is take my knife and sort of rock it back and forth in that knife, in that transfer line, to extend it further. And it'll be nice and straight and true, and it won't veer off. You can see, like, as it got tight, I could have like pulled away a little bit, and that's just a problem. What I don't want to do right now, I have this sort of saddle to hold it at the right angle, but if I go and do that, I only have a spring clamp holding it. It can push down, and I found that when that pushes down, you know, you're in the risk of cutting yourself. I don't want to see that happen to anybody. So what I'm going to do is, my saddle did a nice job of holding that for me while I transferred, but really now I don't need it. So I'm going to get rid of this, set it aside. And then I'm going to put this firmly in my vise. Maybe I'll seat it a little bit lower so you can see a little better. What I don't want is for this to dip down on me when I have that sharp knife in my hand. Both hands behind the knife, never like this. You're never holding it like this. You can cut yourself. These Swiss-made ones, when you buy them, they're out of the package, they're razor sharp. So I'm just going to sort of drag this along the end grain until I feel it just drop into that knife line. I don't want to force it into place. I want to let it find itself, its own direction. Okay, that's dropping in. Just like we did with the chisel along our marking gauge scribe when we were chopping out our tails. We're letting the tool slide into that scribe line. You notice I have both hands behind the knife. I'm just going to go and rock it back and forth and proceed along that whole row. As I get to this end, if it feels a little like it wants to tip, just take it and move it over to the other side. Make sure that doesn't tip. That's when people slip and get a little nick. So now I've transferred it with my knife. That knife line is very accurate. That's what I'm going to go by, but to make it a little bit easier for you to see on the camera, for me to see when I'm cutting, I'm going to use my 005 mechanical pencil. I'm going to let that find its way into the knife line and just drag it lightly. You've heard me say this before, the 005, not this 07 or 09, they're too wide. This one just finds its way in the path of the knife mark. Okay, so that's easier to see. I'll use my dovetail saddle square. You could use a combination square for this if you wanted. All I'm doing is taking my square and transferring this line down at 90 degrees until it hits the marking gauge scribe. I can feel when it clicks into the marking gauge scribe, and that's when I stop. I don't want to go past the scribe line with my pencil. I find when I do that, I tend to go past with my saw as well. All right, so I've transferred that down to 90 degrees. I'll go ahead and do that on the other side as well, and I might darken my marking gauge scribe with my mechanical pencil as well. At that point, I'll mark my waist. We don't want to get confused about that. So now I've got everything marked out. Follow along to the next video in the series where we'll actually cut our pins. Subscribe for more woodworking videos.